When I installed the rainwater collection system a couple of years ago, I also tied in the existing gutters from the shed, and I used these flexible hoses to connect them. Over the years, they just rotted away, and now it was time to replace them with a more permanent solution. Removing the old stuff was relatively easy, just a couple of screws and then they felt right off. And then I made a quick trip to Lowe's to buy some new material. Initially I wanted to build everything with 3-inch pipe, but I quickly realized that this is way too big, way too heavy and way too expensive. So I stepped it down to 2-inch material, which is about half the cost and way easier to handle. So I collected a few parts, a few elbows, a few straight lines, a few pipe fittings and also a 10-foot pipe, which, well, it didn't right fit in the car, but well, that's what you have sunroofs for, right? I also bought a transition piece from the rectangular shape downspout of the gutters to the new round pipes, but that only came in 4 inches, so I had to build an adapter and it didn't quite fit. I had to do a little bit of sanding to make them slide together. For some reason they are incompatible. And sanding this stuff wasn't really easy. It more melted away than got sanded away. So it got a little messy, but with the glue at the end, it made a nice fit. And then, well, later on, it didn't really matter. So it worked out at the end. Then I worked my way down with the new parts. I put the top one in place, took a few measurements, cut the connecting sections, glued them in place, and so on. It's really easy to cut this 2-inch material with this big ratchet scissor thing. I couldn't have cut the 3-inch material, so I'm really glad that I stepped down to 2-inch. So it only took a couple of minutes, well, maybe an hour, to cut everything, got it glued, and it really looked pretty at the end. By the way, this pipe glue that I'm using, this blue stuff, it doesn't require a primer. You just have to apply one coating to either side of the pipe, then stick them together, maybe a quarter turn to smear it around, and it sets in a couple of minutes. This holds great, and well, after all, those pipes are not pressurized, but even if they were, it's not a problem. Then I took it off again and spray painted it white, mostly to hide the blue pipe glue and also to give it a little bit of better UV protection. I guess I was so focused on installing the new stuff that I didn't really realize at the time how dirty the old pipes were. See all that green mold? Wow, that's just ugly. So after I realized that when editing the video, I went back outside with the pressure washer and give it all a good wash. These PVC pipes clean easily and they are now just as white and shiny as they were when they were new. And of course the shed has 2 gutters, one on each side, and I had to repeat everything on the second side. So this is where the pipe runs from the shed where the water collection barrels are down to the pond, and it's much greener. I think the topsoil we filled the trench with is of much better quality, so everything grows a lot better than in the rest of the garden. Quite interesting, I never noticed. The existing trunk has two 4-inch inlets, so I bought some caps, drilled a 2-inch hole into them, well, a little bit bigger than 2 inches, so the 2-inch pipe will fit into it. And this should make a relatively tight seal, well, tight enough so that mosquitoes can't get in. They tend to get into everything that holds water and they breed in there, so that's certainly something we want to avoid. This should do it just fine. And that's it. That completes this part of the project. It only took a couple of hours and it only required one trip to Lowe's, which is way below my usual average for any project. So now I want to come up with the system that automatically fills up those small barrels. They are not tied into the main ones, so they don't fill up at the same rate. For now, we are using buckets and fill them manually. But now I came up with the system that puts a submergible pump into one of the big barrels that is solar driven, pumps the water up, and then we use a little water line, use gravity to fill up the small ones. And then I put a float switch in the small ones that shut off the water if they are full, and I also put a float switch into the main ones that also shut off the water if the main ones get too low. So it's supposed to be fully automatic. It takes a little while to fill them up. I mean, it's just a small pump, but it runs on its own. It's solar driven, and we no longer have to fill them manually. Let's see how that goes. I wanted to install the submergible pump on the west side of the shed where the solar panel gets the most sun, but the actual barrels that I wanted to feed are on the east side. So first I had to run a small 1/2-inch pipe around the shed. It needed a constant slope because I wanted to use gravity to feed the water into the barrel, so the pump only pumps it up a tiny little bit above the top surface of the barrels, and then I use gravity in the pipe to feed the water into them. The pump itself I installed to this PVC strip. I think it's some leftover trim material. I also installed the pump side flow switch slightly above the pump, so it can shut the pump off at any time the water drops to that level. I also prepared a junction box for all the electrical connections. This one has a rubber gasket, so it should be watertight when installed outside. Some of the cables I had to make a bit longer, so I used these self-sealing, self-soldering, heat shrink activated cable splice device thingies. Now I installed the float switch in the barrels. They have this plastic lip at the top, I guess to stiffen them up a little bit, and I couldn't go with the switch above this lip because then it would have been too close to the drain hole, and installing it under the lip means I can no longer, or at least not automatically, fill them up to the brim, but that's an acceptable trade-off. Running the cable from the float switch to over where the pump is was next, and I think this is one of the rare occasions where I'm using cable ties for their intended purpose. Now the pump assembly went in. I attached a piece of broken concrete to this wire mesh at the bottom to give it a little more stability and prevent it from floating up. Fishing all the cables through this half-inch conduit was a little tricky, but it worked out at the end. And after connecting the solar panel and turning into the sun, the pump, well, it started pumping.
There was a hazy day downtown LA where I met her on an elevator on its way up to the hotel room of my fiancé. But I never made it there because she come tearing.
This tiny little pump doesn't pump a ton of water. I think it's rated at 170 liters per hour. So it might take a few hours to fully fill up the barrels, but I mean it does it on its own and it does it on solar power, so I don't care how long it takes.
She was blowing through my door like a going out of style. In general, I was a sensible guy.
I tidied up the cables, secured them with some wire nuts and some cable ties, put them in their junction box, put the lid on and called it a day. This is one completed project. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Well, I lost my job and all of my money. Most of my friends and half of my mind. So messed up, it's a little funny. And I thought for sure that she was mine. But now I'm alone, just trying to get it right. Picking up the pieces of
And of course it was overcast the entire next day. The sun didn't come out a lot and the solar panel didn't provide enough juice for the pump to fully spin up. It came on every once in a while, but not enough to really fill up the pipe. So I guess we will be only collecting rainwater today and then use the pump to fill up the small barrels at a later time. Again, thank you for watching and hope to see you soon.